From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Kaylee Lyons. President Trump pushes his tax priorities in a meeting with House Republicans at the White House. And Speaker Mike Johnson says they reached a framework for a path forward. As Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent tells Bloomberg making the 2017 tax cuts permanent is best for predictability. We'll bring you some of that conversation and be joined by Republican Congressman James Comer, chair of the House Oversight Committee, on the work of DOGE as a judge temporarily delays tonight's deadline for federal workers accepting buyouts. And President Trump says the administration is making progress to stop the war in Ukraine. We'll get reaction from the region with Lithuania's new Minister of Foreign Affairs this hour. Thanks for joining us on this Thursday evening. We begin with President Trump's extended meeting at the White House with House Republicans today to discuss their plans for getting his tax agenda through Congress. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirming the president's priorities this afternoon.
No tax on tips, which is obviously a very public campaign promise that the president made. No tax on seniors' Social Security. No tax on overtime pay. Renewing President Trump's 2017 middle-class tax cuts. Again, these are the president's priorities. Adjusting the SALT cap, eliminate all the special tax breaks for billionaire sports team owners, close the carried interest tax deduction loophole, tax cuts for Made in America products. This will be the largest tax cut in history for middle-class working Americans. The president is committed to working with Congress to get this done.
And House Speaker Mike Johnson just told reporters at the Capitol that they have a framework on reconciliation and are hoping to make some announcements by tomorrow. So joining me now for more is Bloomberg's Megan Scully. Megan, maybe a framework, yes. We don't necessarily have the details on that, though.
Yes, we have perhaps the broad contours, or they have the broad contours, and they're not sharing. What Caroline Leavitt laid out were Trump's priorities. We don't know exactly what was hashed out in that room. The meeting went on for some 3+ hours. We don't know how long Trump was in there, although House Republicans returning to the Capitol said that he was heavily involved. They got out whiteboards and drank a lot of water, apparently, and hashed out some kind of a deal. But before anyone gets too excited about this, there's a lot of questions remaining in terms of what is in this deal and can it pacify the SALT caucus, the people who want to see their state and local tax deduction be extended significantly. Does it include, programs for, does it protect programs for, the low and middle class families? Child tax credit, Medicaid, Medicare, things that a lot of Republicans are starting to make some noise about, that they're concerned that that could end up on the chopping block. Interestingly to me, what was mentioned at the White House today was the carried interest loophole and ending that, which was something that Democrats actually tried to do. And this is something that benefits hedge fund managers, and Democrats tried to end it during their own reconciliation process, only to have to drop it at the last minute because of Kyrsten Sinema, who opposed doing so.
Okay, so obviously there's a lot to keep track of here. There's also the question of the Senate, because the Senate Budget Chair, Lindsey Graham, said, I'm moving ahead next week with a 2-bill strategy, essentially. Is there still a chance that the upper chamber moves first?
They certainly could, or they could move in tandem, perhaps. The Republican Party wants to show a united front on this. It's becoming increasingly hard because of all the factions that I laid out. In the Senate, they're eager to get a win on the board, and they want to move ahead with an immigration bill that would have some $300 billion over the next 4 years for border enforcement and for defense programs. That was the plan that Lindsey Graham laid out yesterday. That frustrated House members who only want to take one difficult vote, not two. So they want one package that they can put forth, that they can strong arm lawmakers into voting for. Because remember, everybody in the House is up for re-election next year. So there's a lot to still be worked out here. The hope is, according to Mike Johnson, to have a plan, to have details tomorrow and a plan next week. we'll see. That's where the devil is in the details, right?
Yeah. Well, because it was originally this week that they were going to be marking up a budget resolution, and now we're already
time is fungible on the Hill. So.
Clearly, and Megan Scully knows that well. Thank you so much. And speaking of the Hill, we go there now live to Republican Congressman James Comer of Kentucky, the chair of the Oversight Committee, joining us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time. As the Speaker just returned to the Capitol, I'm assuming you have not yourself been able to get a readout of what this framework might look like. But what needs to be in it in order to pacify all the various parts of your conference?
Well, I think the most important thing is that Trump publicly endorses the plan. And right now there's uncertainty as to whether it should be one bill or two bills. I think you read off all the tax cuts that he wants, and I think that's great. I support all those tax cuts. But for the budget reconciliation to work, then you're going to have to offset those tax cuts with revenue. So a couple of the exemptions he mentioned would help a little bit, but it still doesn't pay for the Social Security exemption. That's $1.4 trillion, if I'm correct, but with what the CBO scores that. So that's a pretty substantial amount that's going to have to be offset in other areas. So I'm going to support whatever, because I believe that we need to make our fiscal house in order. I believe we need to eliminate these trillion-dollar annual deficits. And to do that, it's not going to be easy. I'm willing to do that. But I think to get the votes, to get through the House of Representatives, which every single Republican is going to have to support, I think the president's going to have to endorse it and say, this is my bill, this is my agenda, and this is what the people gave me a mandate to pass.
Well, so for those hardline fiscal conservatives within the conference, sir, what actually is realistically possible to achieve in terms of spending cuts? Is it going to have to reach entitlements to get to the kind of levels that they are pushing for? Well,
the reconciliation is mandatory spending. It's not discretionary spending. A lot of the stuff that a lot of conservatives go on TV and talk about, like foreign aid, that's discretionary. That's not mandatory spending. So when you talk about mandatory spending, you're talking about more difficult pots of money in the budget, which are ironically the bigger pots. Now, Social Security is the biggest one. The president's made very clear he doesn't want to touch Social Security, and Congress would never do that in this session. So Social Security is off the table. Medicare and Medicaid, what he's talked about and what members of Congress have talked about are reforms, not cutting the total budget, but making reforms for payments to try to eliminate fraud and improper payments and things like that. So obviously, a lot of people in the healthcare industry are nervous about that. We've been hearing from them today on Capitol Hill. So it's very difficult to make this type of change that I think needs to be made. But again, my advice is that President Trump's going to have to say, this is my specific bill. And I think he would get there a lot quicker than waiting for Congress, because if you ask 217 of my colleagues what their opinion is, you're going to get 217 different opinions. And I think the most important opinion in Washington is Trump's opinion. And I think that would speed this process up a lot if he would come out and endorse a specific plan.
Well, and then there's the opinion of Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency, Mr. Chairman. Last night, I spoke with someone who sits on the Oversight Committee with you, Republican Congressman Byron Donalds of Florida. And this is what he had to say about Elon Musk and the DOGE and the access to information they are getting.
There is nothing he can do without approval from either the President of the United States or with respect to members of Congress voting for it in legislation. But let's also be very clear. Let's not act like the United States has been able to pass audits every single year. That is not the case. So you got to have somebody who understands how to reorganize organizations and get them to be lean and efficient. And that's what Elon is doing.
But as Elon Musk does this work, Mr. Chairman, he's doing so as someone who is not an elected representative like you yourself are. He wasn't confirmed by the Senate through the advise and consent process. Is there an oversight role for your committee specifically to play here? Why not have him testify before you?
Well, I think Elon Musk is being very transparent. He's tweeting out multiple tweets every hour about every thought that goes through his mind on DOGE. I think that's where he tests a lot of his ideas on Twitter, for better or worse. But the most important thing for me as chairman of the Oversight Committee, he's being very transparent. I don't think there's anything that Musk or Trump have talked about with respect to DOGE that they didn't talk about during the campaign. So when you talk about unelected people making decisions, I think in the Biden administration, we had a lot of unelected bureaucrats that no one, including myself, ever knew who they were, that were making a lot of decisions in a lot of the different cabinets and agencies.
In the Oversight Committee, go to great lengths to try to at least hold those people accountable. Isn't there a difference between transparency and accountability?
Well, everything that I've asked from DOGE, they've responded. When I would ask for information in the previous administration, we would hear nothing but crickets, or a media story would come out, attacking me for having the audacity to ask for something. I think that as long as Musk continues to be transparent, I think that's the most important thing. But Byron Donalds is right. He doesn't have the authority to do anything. It's either the President of the United States or Congress. And, with respect to Musk, he's not operating, behind closed doors in a smoke-filled room. He is being very transparent. He's in communication with my committee. He's in communication with, I know, Senator Ernst in the Senate. And we're just trying to work together in a sincere fashion to find waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement in the federal government to root out. There are worthy government programs. There are tremendous federal employees, but there are a lot of, employees that I think the taxpayers could do without. And there are a lot of programs that are obsolete or unneeded. So we're just trying to figure out what we need and what we don't. This is playing out in the public role. The media should be, pretty happy that there's transparency and open debate and discussion and dialogue, and politicians and the president are available for press conferences and things like that. So as long as we keep doing that, I think most people on the Oversight Committee are going to be pretty happy.
So do you, sir, have access and transparency into the information of, say, through the Treasury payment system? What exact details Musk and the DOGE team have been able to access? Whose specific Social Security numbers, for example? Do you have transparency that far?
I think what Musk is trying, I don't think Musk is trying to, create a fake account to draw a $600 a month Social Security check. I think what he's trying to do is figure out where the kinks are in the system that are allowing for improper payments and fraud. There are a lot of fraudulent Social Security accounts all across America where, and this is a known fact, that this thing called improper payments, where our software is susceptible to being hacked, and people are getting unemployment payments that aren't real people. People are, in fact, businesses are getting SBA loans. People are drawing Social Security that don't exist. It's part of a international scam that's costing Americans a fortune. And I think that's what the objective of Musk with Treasury and Social Security is, to try to get a handle on how much of these improper payments are going out. And is there a way to fix the software system to prevent cyber fraud?
All right, Mr. Chairman, appreciate your time this evening, sir. That's the House Oversight Committee Chair, James Comer. And still ahead, we'll bring you Bloomberg's interview with the new Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. Yes, they too discussed Treasury payment system access in DOGE. And we'll have more next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Earlier today, Bloomberg's Saleha Mohsin, host of the Big Take DC podcast, sat down for a wide-ranging conversation with the new Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. And they started by discussing the Department of Government Efficiency and access that the organization has to Treasury payment systems.
Employees. It is 2 Treasury employees, one of whom I personally interviewed in his final round. There is no tinkering with the system. They are on read-only. They are looking. They can make no changes. It is an operational program to suggest improvement. So we make 1.3 billion payments a year. And this is two employees who are working with a group of long-standing employees.
The letter that the Treasury Department sent earlier this week talked about how the team currently does not have access to change the system. Have they at any point this year had the ability to make changes?
Absolutely not. This is no different than you would have at a private company. And by the way, the ability to change the system sits over at the Federal Reserve. So it doesn't even lie in this building. So they could make suggestions on how to change the system, but we don't even run the system.
And if they ask for, if they request the ability to change the system, would you grant that?
No, again, they have no ability to change the system. I have no ability to grant that change. That they can make suggestions, then it would go to the Federal Reserve, and just like any large ERP system, there would be tests, there would be this, there would be that, and then the Fed will determine whether these changes are robust or not.
As the Secretary of Treasury, you also oversee the IRS. Do you know what kind of access the team has to IRS data or individual taxpayer data?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, too, because, look, the IRS, the privacy issue is one of the biggest issues. And over the past 4 years, we've seen a lot of leaks out of there. The IRS systems are quite poor. When I started in college in 1980, I learned the program in COBOL. I think there are 12 different systems at the IRS that still run on COBOL. But as of now, there is no engagement at the IRS.
And if they request that access, would you sign off on that request?
They haven't, so we'll take that when it comes to it. I think there is a lot to do there, but the president was elected with a big agenda, and to the extent that getting the IRS in better shape is part of that, sure. Because, look, with the IRS, what am I concerned about? I am concerned about collections, I'm concerned about privacy, and I'm concerned that the system is robust,
but do you
and customer service.
But do you think that if they ask for access, that is something you would consider signing off on?
There are a lot of things I would consider, but look, we're in the middle of the tax filing season right now. We even, with the government buyouts that expire at midnight tonight, we have mandated that the IRS customer-facing employees, that they're not eligible for that until May 15th. So I don't imagine anything's going to go on at the IRS until then or beyond.
Elon Musk, just half an hour ago, tweeted out that Treasury needs to stop approving certain payments. Has your staff tried to block any payments here at Treasury?
We have not, and I'm glad you asked that too. And just to put it in perspective, Elon and I are completely aligned in terms of cutting waste and increasing accountability and transparency for the American people. I believe that this DOGE program in my adult life is one of the most important audits of government or changes to government structure we have seen. That when I was in my 20s, we had the Grace Report, and there's some great suggestions that came out of that, never implemented. Under Clinton and Gore, I think it was to government efficiency or reduce government. Nothing happened. So President Trump came in, there's a big agenda, and I think that there are gigantic cost savings for the American people here. And I think it's unfortunate the way the media wants to lampoon what is going on.
Now, news in this administration is flying fast, and we should note that since that interview was recorded earlier today, a federal judge temporarily delayed the deadline for the administration's buyout program that Secretary Bessent mentioned until Monday. But joining me now for more on the conversation is the wonderful colleague of mine who conducted that interview. Bloomberg's Saleha Mohsin is here with me in studio. And Saleha, as you talked about DOGE and the kind of efforts to rein in fiscal spending of the U.S., what access they're getting to do that, he also talked about this notion that they are going to try to use fiscal efforts to bring rates down so that they don't have to worry about what the Fed is going to do if they're cutting or hiking or what have you.
And Kaylee, if this is true, this is how things play out, where this administration, this Treasury Secretary, and now this president is going to focus on the 10-year yield, not on what the Fed is doing. This is going to be the first time that we're going to be hearing this kind of commentary since the 1990s. It was Treasury Secretary Bob Rubin under the Clinton administration that decided, or was forced to by bond vigilantes, to focus on the 10-year yield and what that was doing to the economy and what they could channel through into the economy through fiscal policy.
We're almost out of time, but what was the most surprising thing he said to you today?
That DOGE is not made up of people who are running rampant.
Okay, fair enough. Of course, you can get full coverage of Bloomberg and Saleha specifically's interview with Scott Bessent on the terminal and online. Plenty of stories you can check out as well. And still ahead, Trump's pick for the U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer faced his Senate confirmation hearing today, and we'll take a look at some of the key moments next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. President Trump's nominee to be the next U.S. Trade Representative faced questions from lawmakers today. And Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall has the details on the confirmation hearing from Capitol Hill. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Kaylee. President Trump's pick to be the next USTR is Jamieson Greer. He served under the first Trump administration as the chief of staff to then USTR Robert Lighthizer. When President Trump announced his nomination, he said that Greer was part of the renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement and also applauded his contributions to helping to implement tariffs against China under the first Trump administration. Tariffs, Kaylee, came up a lot during the confirmation hearing today, where Greer largely defended President Trump's policies.
The president knows how to shepherd the economy. He knows how to balance these things. And I think that we need to stay the course when it comes to fentanyl, when it comes to redoing trade policy, so we can all grow together.
Many Democrats used the confirmation hearing to say they'd work with Greer on issues such as addressing trade imbalances, but criticized President Trump's rhetoric around tariffs and risks to inflation. While the threats against Mexico and Canada is on hold for a month, a 10% tariff across the board went into place against China this week. According to China customs data, Beijing's retaliatory list targets about $14 billion in imported U.S. goods. That is a sliver of the exports that the U.S. has tariffed. Now, as you were talking about in the last block with Saleha, she sat down with the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who also spoke about this dynamic between the U.S. and China when it comes to tariffs.
I think especially that China now, given all their excess capacity, will, no matter the level of the tariffs, will end up eating quite a bit.
The USTR is a cabinet-level position, but Kaylee, it remains to be seen how much responsibility Greer would have, considering that Trump has said that Howard Lutnick will have purview over trade, as well as has appointed Peter Navarro to be a senior counselor on trade and manufacturing.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall live on Capitol Hill for us. Thank you so much, and we'll have more Balance of Power straight ahead on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Russia and Ukraine, that should have never happened. It's a horrible situation going on over there. We're working very hard, and I think making progress to stop it.
President Trump speaking at the National Prayer Breakfast earlier today, with his administration reportedly planning to present a plan to end the war in Ukraine at the Munich Security Conference next week. And joining me now for more here on Bloomberg TV and radio is Kęstutis Budrys, Lithuania's new Minister of Foreign Affairs. Minister, great to see you here in Washington, D.C., where you're visiting this week. I do wonder what kind of conversations you're having here, and if you feel like you'll leave here with more clarity on what exactly the U.S.'s plan is when it comes to Ukraine.
I got the confirmation today from my many meetings that I had on the Hill that the U.S. will follow the lines that were already announced, that would be based on the strengths. And the peace will be also through this increasing the strength, and that would be the strong messages also to Putin that U.S. has leverage in these upcoming negotiations, and that would produce the result that we are all waiting. And that is the long-lasting, sustainable peace in Europe. And that would be the result that would make an impact globally also, because this conflict is already global, with North Korea's troops there, with the support of China, of Iran. So these messages that they already received, they are encouraging also us to do more.
Well, so when we consider this peace plan that we understand the U.S. is preparing to present in Munich, where you will be next week, what does it need to look like for Lithuania to find it acceptable? What does Lithuania think actually will bring about that lasting peace?
The very approach has to be to stop the aggression. That's not about only achieving the ceasefire and some truce, but to stop the aggression. And the aggression from Russia comes from its very source of imperialism and through the means that they are using. That is the military power and also the nuclear coercion in balance with these two elements. So we have to build a system that would deter Russia in the future from taking these steps again. Because if it won't be there, if there won't be the safeguards in this plan, so Russia will come. Be it 2 years, 3 years, they will reconstitute their armed forces and they will return. So our interest is that it will be a long-lasting system with involvement of everyone, also with the strong European part in it, with the long-term support, financial, economic and military to Ukraine to deter Russia.
Shouldn't Ukraine be able to join NATO to ensure a longer-lasting peace, or does that actually make the situation potentially more dangerous?
Ukraine's membership, NATO membership, that's the cheapest and fastest way to gain the security guarantees for Ukraine. We all understand that. If it is not accomplishable, there are other substitutes that will cost us more and that will require from us more time. But yes, when we are talking about the guarantees, that's one of the good options to have on the table. And when we are going to the negotiations, there would be unreasonable to take off those options. We have to have those. Because we have to have, US has to have the initiative on your side, as it is already, and have all leverages. And those leverages has to be also some sticks, strong military sticks that would force also the regime, Russia's regime, to the table and to negotiate.
Well, when we consider the sticks that NATO has available to use, Donald Trump has talked about countries spending more resources in terms of defense, including on his inauguration day. This is what he had to say about NATO and the war in Ukraine.
NATO has to pay more money. NATO has to pay 5%. We're in the Ukraine war by $200 billion more than NATO. It's ridiculous because it affects them a lot more. We have an ocean in between. And we've spent $200 billion more on Ukraine than NATO has spent. And they've got to equalize.
So he mentioned that 5% level, and Lithuania just so happens to now be targeting 5% spending of GDP on defense by next year, 2026. How do you do that quickly?
That came from understanding that we have to strengthen our own defenses. We have to invest more. And the very beginning was the NATO regional plans that we all agreed. Those plans are operational ways how to defend against Russia and how to deter Russia. For those plans, we need capabilities. And the capabilities, we have to develop those, because in Europe, we all know that all these years of underspending opened the huge gaps. So we have to invest more. For Lithuania, the answer is that if we want to have the war-fighting capable armed forces till 2030, we have to spend more. And when we calculated that it was from 5 to 6% of GDP annually that we will reach next year already. This year, that will be 4% of GDP spending. Our neighbors already announced same plans, and our expectation is that other countries further into continental Europe also will follow this path, because this is the way how to make Europe strong and a good, capable partner of U.S. in many fields, not only in Eurasia, but also Indo-Pacific. That's our way. And actually, our support now is even increasing to Ukraine.
So do you think 5% is an appropriate level for every country in the alliance to target? Can everyone get there?
There are different situations with the armed forces. Some of the armed forces are really in really bad shape in Europe. Some of those are more capable right now. Of course, it depends on the country. But when we look in our stockpiles, when we look at the very status of how war capable they are, of course we have to spend more. 5% is not the right answer to each of the countries, but we have to increase. That's the correct answer. And in the Hague summit that we will have this year, June, we hope that all the allies will agree that 2% is not enough. We have to go 3 and beyond 3% as the alliance. And that's the good also way to send the message to aggressors, Russia, first of all, that we are serious here. And we're getting ready to strengthen ourselves.
I do also wonder what message it's going to send to Russia when just days from now, Lithuania, together with Latvia and Estonia, I believe, leaves the Russian electricity grid. Does that actually make things a little bit more tenuous in terms of potentially upsetting Russia? What does that do for Lithuania?
That's the final stage of our energy independence that we started a couple of decades ago, when we imported 100% of natural gas from Russia, crude oil 100% from Russia, and electricity we were dependent, as we today still are, within the one Russia's operated system of the electricity grids. So we built LNG terminal. Now we are buying more than 50% from US, our LNG imports. We are not buying crude or any oil products from Russia. Now electricity, the final stage. So what will happen this weekend? We will desynchronize from Russia's system and synchronize, meaning connecting in with our lines to continental Europe. And after that, we will dismantle physically the lines. We will just cut the lines with Russia and Belarus. So this is also the strong signal to Russia that we are leaving, the last systems that we will belong to. And it's also a strong signal to our friends and allies in Europe that you can make it also. It takes time, it takes some investment, but first of all, it takes a strong political will, and you can do it. So we did it.
Do you have any concern about reliability or potentially sabotage as we look at things that have happened in the Baltic Sea with cables being disrupted and that kind of thing?
We see a lot of disinformation coming from Russia. They try to show that it's a bad decision, that will make ourselves vulnerable and so forth and so forth. But we've seen it before also, and we know how to deal with it. You have to send a strong message to societies that we know what we do. There are some contingencies they're already prepared, and we are safe and secure. So that's our message, and this is how we will implement it. And talking about the connectivity through the Baltic Sea, all the lines that we have on the seabed, yes, we are reliant on them. Yes, Russia tries to sabotage some of the communications, and this is something to stress that there are some differences in the Baltic Sea and in other seas, because Baltic Sea is really shallow sea. You can reach the communications, be it cable or some pipeline, even with the anchor of the ship. So this is one thing. Another thing is that we are dependent on those, not only on the cables of communications, but also on energy lines. This is electricity lines in the seabed and also gas pipeline, also connecting us through the seabed. So it makes us vulnerable from that side, and that's why we are paying a lot of attention in raising the awareness of our allies that this is the problem, that we have to invest into the surveillance of the sea, what is happening above the sea and also under the sea, and of course the capabilities to react to different situations. And that will be one of the topics also we expect in Hague summit, NATO summit, June this year.
All right, Minister, thank you so much for spending some time with us while here in Washington. Kęstutis Budrys, Lithuania's Minister of Foreign Affairs. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And still ahead, the House Speaker Mike Johnson says a budget reconciliation framework was reached in a meeting at the White House today. We'll have more with our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The more bills you have, the more uncertainty you interject into this whole process. We're talking about tax cuts, border, energy independence, and spending cuts. Out of those four things, there's a million things that could go wrong in each one of the four policy objectives. I think the only way to go forward, like the president has said, like our speaker has said, like our appropriations chair has said, one big bill. And you know what? Quite frankly, it's frustrating that we can't land on an answer. Even if it was two bills, somebody make the call and go forward. We can't be messing around with this.
Republican Congressman Mike Flood of Nebraska on the early edition of Balance of Power today, talking about the House battle over reconciliation. But according to the Speaker, after a hours-long meeting at the White House today, maybe there is a path forward, or at least a framework. They got to talk more this evening. And to talk more about it with me here in our D.C. studio is this evening's political panel here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Sarah Chamberlain, President and CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership and Republican strategist, alongside Democratic strategist Adam Hodge, Managing Director at Bully Pulpit International. Welcome to you both. Sarah, I'll come to you first, as you obviously know the Republican conference quite well. When Mike Johnson says there's a framework, do we believe it?
We do. So while the chairman of the caucus was talking to Mike Flood, there was a group of members from the Republican Party and kind of from all different sides of the Republican Party. They had like Congressman Bacon, Congressman Fitzpatrick, Chip Roy was there, like a wide range. So the president sat them down and said, listen, we cannot count on Democratic votes. We need to get a framework done. They were there for hours. They do have a framework. They hope to get on the floor next week. They talked about SALT. They talked about debt ceiling, which might get tied into this. They talked about extending the tax cuts. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that we can move forward on this and get this accomplished quickly.
Well, but when we consider the disparate groups that you were kind of referring to there, the hardline fiscal conservatives who want deep, deep spending cuts, Adam, is it as easily done as said?
No, and I think, look, after the chaotic first few weeks of the Trump administration, we're settling into what it will be the main political fight of this year. This is the main event. And I think you're going to see Republicans have to wrestle with a lot of really tough issues. I mean, just extending the tax cuts alone is $4.4 trillion. Now, if they shrink it to 5 years, you're still talking $2.2 trillion here. And that's before you talk about SALT or any of the other promises from the campaign. And they've said the tariffs are going to be the thing that pays for it. But if I'm like any country around the world, I'm wondering like how much is that going to eat into my profitability? If I'm U.S. companies, they're going to try to find $2.2 trillion. That's a lot of money to come in, and I don't think tariffs can do it. The math has no opinion here. I don't think it works out.
Well, so when we're considering the math and the cost of all these different policies, when Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, came out today and said Donald Trump's making it clear he does want no tax on tips, overtime, Social Security, lose the carried interest break, SALT cap raised. Is he going to get all of those things as part of this framework, or is there give and take here?
There's going to be a little give and take. There's going to have to be to get, again, we can't count on Democrats. So the Republican Main Street Partnership membership is working hard to try to okay, let's build everything together. There will be give and take. Hopefully not a lot of it, because we do need all those things done. But, everything's on the table.
Well, so when we consider the role of Democrats here, knowing that it's not just reconciliation, but raising a debt ceiling, whether that is folded into this, getting the government funded beyond mid-next month, which we all seem to be forgetting about. There is a clock ticking here as well. Should we be counting Democrats out entirely? Are they not going to participate in the way we have seen them in the last few years for the necessary must-pass legislation?
Look, the Republicans have had to lean on Democrats to pass a budget in the last couple of years. Going forward, I don't think you can expect any Democrats to vote for the tax cuts and the tax extension. I just don't think the politics, especially after the way the well has been poisoned for the first few weeks of the administration, that will get Democrats on board with the massive tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy. I just don't think politically you're going to look for that. I think so that gives the Republicans a really hard time corralling all the different people in their caucus. You have Republicans who make the majority in New York and California who've said, I'm not voting for any bill that doesn't have SALT. Like the budget hawks on the Republican side would say, we can't afford to extend it with SALT, and that only jacks up the bill even more. So I don't think that you can expect any Democrats to come on board with the tax bill. The debt ceiling is a whole other question, but all of a sudden Trump's got religion, and maybe he thinks we shouldn't have the debt limit at all. So we'll have to see how this unfolds. I think it's problematic for them that it's taken them this long just to get to a decision on one bill versus two.
Yeah.
And so, then raises questions: how quickly can they actually get around to a final bill? That's a whole lot of noise that you got to wrestle with.
Well, and to that point, it seems we're getting a little short on patience on Capitol Hill, because the Senate is ripping and roaring and ready to go. Lindsey Graham says, I'm ready to introduce what will be a two-step process beginning next week. Is the House going to be able to get this done before the Senate makes a move?
I think that's why the meeting was today. Obviously, the Senate has a little bit more wiggle room. They've got a larger majority than the House does. So I think Trump said, OK, let's get everybody on the same page, bring them together, and see if we can get something moving by next week.
All right, Sarah Chamberlain and Adam Hodge will be sticking with me. And still ahead, we turn to a federal judge temporarily delaying the administration's federal worker buyout. We'll take a look at that and wider efficiency efforts with our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
With respect to Musk, he's not operating, behind closed doors in a smoke-filled room. He is being very transparent. He's in communication with my committee. He's in communication with, I know, Senator Ernst in the Senate. And we're just trying to work together in a sincere fashion to find waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement in the federal government to root out.
Republican Congressman and chair of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, earlier this hour, talking about DOGE and the influence and access that Elon Musk has in his capacity as a special government employee overseeing the DOGE. Back with me now is this evening's political panel, Sarah Chamberlain and Adam Hodge. So, Adam, obviously we have heard from a number of Republicans saying Elon Musk has the trust of the president, therefore he is proceeding with his business. There is no role for congressional oversight here. Is that a status quo that can remain?
No, I don't think there's any way that can hold. The rampant lawlessness of this whole process is the reason why I think people are increasingly concerned and really have constitutional questions about all of this process. I think for the buyout in particular, one, there's no process that people have been told for how they would get paid, or could they seek another job or anything else. Number two, Congress hasn't appropriated any money to pay for this. Congress has Article 1, they've got to assign how the administration can spend money, and there's been none of that. So I think the reason it was struck down today makes it increasingly likelihood that it gets struck down again and again. But I think the bigger question for me is the issue with the Treasury payments process. And I really, as a former Treasury employee who's been through the debt limit fighting before, I have real concerns about can the DOGE people who have no experience navigating a debt limit fight actually manage the money. And I think that uncertainty raises real questions about whether we could accidentally slip into default.
Well, the Treasury Secretary did tell Bloomberg in an interview today that they don't have control over anything, nor does it seem control would be granted, that no one should think Treasury payments themselves would be disrupted. But it does speak, as Adam was alluding to, Sarah, about the role that Congress is supposed to be playing here. When he's talking about dismantling entire agencies that have had money appropriated to them by Congress or paying out employees, what role do lawmakers have to play in this? And are they getting their fair role in this as the way it's operating right now?
So Elon Musk is getting a lot of press around this. But the reality is this has to come to the House and Senate. And the congressman said that today. He is pointing out fraud, waste, huge amounts of it. It will then come to the House and the Senate to make sure that they clean that up. He is not a federal official. There is, the checks and balance, and this is definitely coming to the House and Senate. I don't understand why people aren't talking about that. It has to come back to the elected officials. But I think it's wonderful, and I think finally someone is pointing out the tremendous waste that's in the federal government.
Well, and obviously, as part of the effort to make the federal government smaller is the buyout program that Adam was alluding to. The deadline was supposed to be midnight tonight. A judge has extended that until at least Monday. But tens of thousands of people have already taken this offer to be paid through September. Is Congress going to be willing to guarantee that money will be there for the people who have made this decision?
They're talking about that now. They're having discussions on that. I believe the answer is going to be yes. It's good to get them off. The $40,000, let them retire, pay them out, and move them on to new jobs they can take, or they can go play golf, whatever they want. But I do think that you'll see the House and Senate give the money towards that.
The thing that really has bothered me about this is you're at the start of a new administration. You should want everybody on the field trying to help get as much of the administration's work done. And these are career civil servants. I've worked with them. They're not, by and large, they're not partisan people. They are there to do the job. And you should have every member on the team who's on the field be on the field. And so asking 40,000 people, which is less than they thought they were going to get, to resign, it just diminishes your ability to get stuff done. And there's a lot of work that the government could be doing that they're quite frankly not doing.
So as you assume, I actually don't agree with you, because there's a lot of waste. I happen to know a person who makes $180,000 a year who's not been in the office in 10 years. I mean, there's a lot of that going on. There's also wonderful employees of the federal government. I support them totally, but there's also a lot of waste there. Let's clean that up. I think it's about time that we look to do that.
It's not lost on me that for all the claims from the Congressman Comer talked about Elon's transparency, not any tweets about any SpaceX contracts that government, the Treasury's paid out, or anything else to, any of his other entities or Starlink or anything else in the administration. So it seems to be a little bit of cherry picking.
Well, and unfortunately, we're out of time to go down that conflicts of interest rabbit hole. So we'll have to save that for the next time. Sarah Chamberlain and Adam Hodge join me, our political panel this evening. Thank you so much. As always, tomorrow is Friday. God bless. It'll be the end of another week in Washington. And of course, for more Washington coverage, check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online. And we will see you back here tomorrow on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.